Long before sunrise, when the streets of Illinois fall quiet, there are places where the darkness never truly sleeps. Miles of rusted tracks stretch into the fog. Abandoned rail cars sit frozen in time. And industrial rail yards, once alive with noise and labor, now stand silent and watching. Wind moves through broken freight cars like a low, endless whisper. Loose chains sway without being touched. Distant metal clanks echo through the night, even when no trains run anymore. Workers once vanished here. Accidents were covered up. Explorers report footsteps behind them on empty tracks. Voices calling from sealed boxcars. And shadowy figures crossing rails that lead nowhere. Tonight, we step into the most haunted industrial rail yards in Illinois. 20 forgotten places where steel, sweat, and tragedy fuse together. Where the dead never clocked out. If you were standing alone between endless tracks, and heard heavy boots walking toward you through the fog, would you turn around or pretend you heard nothing at all? Take a slow breath. Because once you enter the rail yard, the night does not let go easily. Hello my dear friend. It truly means a lot that you are here with me tonight. Before we begin, settle in comfortably. Let your shoulders relax. Allow your breathing to slow. Illinois is built on movement. Trains carried steel, coal, grain, and people across the state. Rail yards became the beating hearts of industry. They were loud, dangerous, and unforgiving. Men worked long nights surrounded by heavy machinery, massive engines, and endless noise. Accidents were common. Mistakes were deadly. Some workers never made it home. Some were crushed, burned, or lost beneath moving trains. And some simply disappeared, never officially recorded. When automation replaced labor, many rail yards were abandoned almost overnight. Left to rot. Left to remember. Now, these places attract urban explorers, photographers, and thrill seekers. Many leave shaken. Some leave injured. And a few refuse to talk about what they experienced at all. Tonight, I will guide you through 20 of the most haunted industrial rail yards in Illinois. Each one soaked in history, danger, and restless energy. Now, let us venture into the heart of darkness, where the forgotten secrets of Illinois' abandoned rail empire await. Come with me, if you dare, into the depths of the abandoned rail yards, where the darkness whispers secrets to those who dare to listen. Join me, if you will, on this journey into the heart of the abandoned rail yards, where the shadows come alive. Here, we will uncover the secrets of the abandoned rail yards, and confront the darkness that lurks within. Come with me, if you dare, into the depths of the abandoned rail yards, where the darkness whispers secrets to those who dare to listen. Join me, if you will, on this journey into the heart of the abandoned rail yards, where the shadows come alive. Here, we will uncover the secrets of the abandoned rail yards, and confront the darkness that lurks within. Tonight, I will guide you through 20 of the most haunted industrial rail yards in Illinois. And before we move any deeper into the fog, let me ask you something. If you were exploring an abandoned rail yard at night and heard a train horn echo where no tracks were active, would you investigate the sound? Or would you run without looking back? The South Switch Yard was once the busiest rail hub in the region, a sprawling network of tracks, signals, and steel where trains arrived and departed at all hours. During its peak, the yard never truly slept. Engines hissed. Metal clanged. Lanterns swung through the dark as workers guided freight into place with practiced precision. It was a place built on timing. Every movement depended on signals, hand gestures, and trust. A single mistake could send thousands of tons of steel in the wrong direction. Among the crew, the brakemen were essential. They walked the tracks at night, lanterns raised, communicating silently with engineers who watched for light through rain, fog, and smoke. New workers learned quickly to watch for his light. Then, one night, he did not come home. An accident occurred during a late shift, quiet and sudden. By morning, the yard was operating again, but one lantern never returned to the locker. The brakeman was gone, his absence marked only by a brief pause in routine before the work continued. Decades passed. Technology replaced much of the old system. Signals became automated. Crews grew smaller. The South Switch Yard slowed, then partially shut down, its busiest days reduced to memory. Only a skeleton crew remained to oversee limited operations and maintenance. That was when the reports began. Late at night, workers noticed a light moving along the inactive tracks. A lantern, swinging gently, just beyond the edge of visibility. But when they called out, no one answered. The lantern continued to move, steady and purposeful, exactly as a brakeman would. It stopped at junctions. It turned slightly at switches. It behaved with the confidence of someone who knew the yard intimately. Records confirmed what many already suspected. The brakeman seen carrying that lantern had died decades ago. The sightings increased over time. Some nights, the lantern appeared near the old signal tower. Other nights, it moved slowly along the far tracks where grass now grew between rails. It was never seen during the day. Only after midnight, when the yard fell quiet and sound carried easily through open space. Those who followed the light shared the same experience. As they walked, they began to hear a train approaching. At first, it was distant, a low vibration felt through the ground. Then came the familiar rhythm, metal on metal, wheels rolling steadily closer. The sound grew louder with every step, echoing through the empty yard. Instinct told them to move aside. But no train ever arrived. The noise would swell to the point of certainty, filling the air with pressure and expectation. Workers braced themselves, eyes scanning the tracks. Then, without warning, the sound stopped. Silence returned instantly, leaving the yard unchanged. The lantern would vanish moments later. Some workers refused to follow it again. Others felt compelled to do so, driven by a sense of responsibility they could not explain. The light did not flicker or behave erratically. It guided, paused, and waited, just as it always had. The experience left a lasting effect. Those who heard the phantom train reported lingering vibrations in their chest, as though the sound had passed through them instead of around them. Sleep became difficult after night shifts. The memory of the approaching train returned uninvited, sharp and vivid. Investigations found nothing. Cameras failed to capture the lantern clearly. Audio equipment recorded only faint ambient noise. No electrical faults explained the light. No nearby trains accounted for the sound. The yard remained officially quiet. Elders who once worked the South Switch Yard offered a different explanation. They said the brakeman never stopped working. That his final shift never ended. The yard, shaped by repetition and routine, kept his movements alive long after his body was gone. They said the approaching train was not real. It was expectation. For decades, the sound of trains had defined the yard. The ground had felt their weight. The air had carried their roar. When the lantern appeared, the yard responded the only way it knew how, by preparing for arrival. Some believed the lantern was a warning. Others believed it was an invitation. No one agreed on why following it caused the sound to grow louder, only that turning away caused it to fade more quickly. Those who stood still heard the train longest, trapped in the moment before arrival that never came. Today, the South Switch Yard stands mostly silent. Tracks rust slowly. Signals remain dark. Yet on certain nights, when fog settles low and the air grows still, a single lantern light can be seen moving through the darkness. It waves gently, steady and familiar. Those who see it feel the same pull, the same instinct to follow. And as they do, the sound begins again, rolling closer through empty space. A train approaching. Always approaching. But never arriving. At Iron Mile Yard, rows of rusted boxcars stretch across a flat expanse of gravel and steel. The tracks run straight and long, disappearing into heat haze by day and darkness by night. Wind moves freely through the open yard, carrying the scent of oil, metal, and old rain. During daylight hours, the place feels empty but ordinary, a forgotten junction left behind by progress. When the sun goes down, the yard feels different. Metal cools and contracts, producing soft groans that echo between cars. Shadows deepen beneath wheels and couplers. Workers who once passed through learn to finish early, leaving Iron Mile Yard to the quiet. The first reports were dismissed as mechanical. A boxcar door slammed shut late one evening, despite no visible movement nearby. The sound was sharp and final, echoing down the line. It was blamed on uneven ground, on wind pressure, on worn hardware finally giving way. The door was reopened and secured. Nothing more happened that night. Then it happened again. Visitors exploring the yard after dark heard the same noise, closer this time. A heavy metal door slid along its track and slammed shut with force. No wind stirred. No vibration passed through the ground. The door appeared sealed, its locking bar firmly in place. Moments later, the pounding began. It came from inside the car, rhythmic and urgent. Not random noise, but deliberate strikes, as if fists were hitting the metal from within. The sound carried clearly through the yard, sharp and unmistakable. Those who heard it froze, listening as the pounding echoed again and again. When the door was opened, the sound stopped immediately. Inside, the boxcar was empty. No footprints marked the floor. No cargo shifted. No signs of recent presence could be found. The air inside was cool and still, carrying only the faint smell of old wood and iron. As soon as the door slid open, silence returned, complete and absolute. The pattern repeated over time. Different boxcars. Different nights. Always the same sequence. Pounding from inside a sealed car. Silence the moment the door opened. No explanation left behind. Word spread quietly. Urban explorers, photographers, and curious locals began visiting Iron Mile Yard after dark. Some came prepared with lights and recording equipment. Others came only to listen. Almost all left unsettled. The pounding varied. Sometimes it was fast and frantic. Other times it came slowly, spaced out, as if conserving energy. Occasionally, it stopped briefly before resuming harder than before. The sound never overlapped between cars. Only one boxcar at a time was ever involved. Attempts to catch the source failed. Cameras positioned inside cars recorded nothing. Audio devices captured the pounding clearly, followed by abrupt silence. Motion sensors triggered without visible movement. Doors that were welded shut were later found open, their seals intact as if never disturbed. Rail officials inspected the yard repeatedly. They found no evidence of tampering. No signs of animals. No mechanical faults that could explain the behavior. Weather conditions were ruled out. The yard remained structurally stable, its tracks level, its cars unmoving. Theories circulated, cautious and restrained. Some suggested residual sound trapped in metal, released by temperature changes. Others pointed to acoustics, to pressure shifts within sealed spaces. None could explain why the pounding sounded intentional, or why it stopped the instant a door was opened. Those who stayed longer noticed something else. The pounding seemed to respond to attention. When visitors approached a boxcar cautiously, the sound grew louder. When they hesitated, it paused. Turning away often caused it to resume, harder than before, as if reacting to being ignored. No voices were ever heard. Only the impact of metal on metal, measured and forceful. A tightness in the chest. The feeling that time was limited. Though nothing visibly threatened them. These sensations faded once they left the yard. Replaced by lingering unease and difficulty explaining what they had experienced. One night, multiple doors slammed in sequence. The sounds echoed down the line, one after another, stopping abruptly before reaching the end of the yard. Pounding followed from only one car. When opened, it was empty, like all the others. The remaining doors were found sealed, untouched. After that, visits declined. Locals avoided the area after dark. Signs were posted warning of unstable equipment and restricted access, though enforcement was minimal. The yard policed itself through fear and uncertainty. Years later, the boxcars still stand. Paint flakes away slowly. Rust spreads along seams. Tracks remain unused but intact. By day, Iron Mile Yard looks abandoned and inert, a place defined by stillness. Those who pass nearby sometimes hear a distant slam carried on the air, followed by a dull, hollow pounding that fades as quickly as it begins. When investigated, nothing is ever found. Doors hang open. Cars sit empty. The pounding always stops when the doors are opened. As if whatever caused it was never meant to be seen. Only heard. And only from the other side of steel walls that were never designed to keep something in. The Black Stack Rail Yard lies in a wide industrial basin where rusted tracks split and rejoin like veins across cracked concrete. Above it rise the old factory smokestacks, tall and narrow, their brick surfaces darkened by decades of soot and weather. Even in daylight, the place feels dim. The stacks block the sun, casting long shadows that stretch across the yard and seem slow to move. When the rail yard was active, it never truly slept. Freight cars rolled in at all hours. Engines hissed and cooled. Metal rang against metal in steady, familiar rhythms. Workers navigated narrow platforms high above the ground, moving between stacks and catwalks with practiced confidence. The height was necessary, but unforgiving. Night shifts were the most dangerous. Visibility dropped sharply once the sun set behind the stacks. Artificial lights created sharp contrasts, leaving deep pockets of darkness between illuminated zones. Steam rose and drifted unpredictably. Workers relied on memory and routine, stepping where they had stepped 1,000 times before. Accidents happened quietly. A missed step. A slick patch of metal. A moment of distraction. Falls were sudden and final. Swallowed by the noise of the yard. Records list several such incidents over the years. Often noted with minimal detail. Production slowed briefly, then resumed. The stacks continued to breathe smoke into the night. Eventually, the rail yard shut down. Factories closed. Trains stopped coming. Equipment was dismantled or left to rust in place. The stacks remained, too expensive to remove, standing as hollow markers of a different era. Over time, weeds pushed through concrete. Rails faded beneath dust. Silence replaced the constant mechanical pulse. Soon after, the sounds began. Heavy footsteps echoed from above, slow and deliberate. The pacing followed the length of the old platforms, stopping, turning, then continuing. Flashlights aimed upward revealed empty catwalks and rusted railings. No loose metal shifted. No birds or animals occupied the height. When observers moved beneath the platforms, the footsteps continued overhead, tracking their movement without matching it exactly. At times, the pacing stopped directly above the listener. Workers from nearby facilities began avoiding the yard at night. Truck drivers reported seeing silhouettes crossing between stacks, briefly blocking moonlight before dissolving into shadow. These figures never descended. They remained above ground level, confined to the structures that once required constant human movement. Audio recordings captured the footsteps with unsettling clarity. Analysis confirms the sound matches the weight and cadence of human steps on metal grating. Local historians revisited old records, noting patterns in the reported activity. The pacing followed routes once used during night shifts. Stops occurred near points where accidents had been documented. The idea emerged that the yard retained a memory of motion. Not individuals, but routine. Years of repeated movement carved into space itself. The platforms remembered being walked. The stacks remembered figures passing between them. When night returned and the yard grew quiet enough, those impressions replayed. Those who stayed too long reported a sense of being observed from above. Not watched with intent, but tracked as part of a pattern. The feeling intensified when standing still, as if movement was expected to continue. Leaving the yard broke the sensation immediately. Attempts to illuminate the platforms fully changed nothing. Floodlights reduced shadows, but the footsteps adapted, shifting to areas just beyond the brightest zones. When lights were turned off, the pacing resumed its original path. No voices accompanied the movement. There were no calls, no warnings, no signs of communication. Only the sound of steps and the movement of shadow. The absence of speech made the phenomenon feel mechanical, stripped of emotion, focused entirely on repetition. At dawn, the rail yard returned to stillness. Sunlight revealed rusted ladders and warped metal. Platforms sagged under their own weight. The stacks stood silent against the sky. No sign of movement remained. Dust lay undisturbed. The ground showed no tracks. Visitors during daylight often struggle to understand the reports. The place looks abandoned and inert. Only when night falls does the yard seem to remember itself. The black stack rail yard does not lure people in. It does not announce its presence. Then the pacing begins again, high above empty ground. Heavy steps moving where workers once stood. Shadows crossing where lights once burned. A routine without workers, repeating itself against brick and steel, long after the last shift ended and the final train departed. Gravel line yard stretches across a shallow valley where nothing grows. The ground is covered entirely in loose stone, pale and angular, shifting softly with every step. From a distance, the place looks unfinished, as if the land was prepared for something that never arrived. There are no fences. No buildings. No clear purpose. The yard gained its name from a single, perfectly straight band of darker gravel that runs through the center, cutting the field in two. It looks deliberate, placed with care, though no records explain why it exists or who laid it. The line does not follow natural contours. It ignores slope and drainage, maintaining its direction with unnatural precision. Walking across gravel-lined yard feels exposed. Sound behaves oddly here. Footsteps crunch loudly, then fall flat, as if absorbed by the stones. Visitors often notice the footprints first by accident. After a few minutes of walking, someone turns around and sees them. Clear impressions pressed into the gravel, sharply defined. Heel. Arch toe. Each stone displaced naturally, exactly as a real step would leave it. The footprints follow at a consistent distance, mimicking the visitor's path with unsettling accuracy. The prints do not lead toward the visitor. They trail behind. At first, many assume they are their own tracks, delayed by attention or perspective. But the spacing is wrong. The angle differs slightly. The pattern reflects a stride that does not match the one just taken. Some notice there are more prints than steps they remember making. When visitors stop walking, the footprints stop too. They end abruptly, cleanly, as if whoever made them simply stepped out of existence. No scuff marks. No sliding stones. Just a final print, sitting alone in the gravel. Turning in a slow circle reveals nothing. The yard is empty. Flat. Silent. Those who attempt to test the phenomenon often do so cautiously. Walking backward erases nothing. The footprints remain until disturbed, then fade quickly as the gravel settles. When walking resumes, new prints appear again, always behind, always at the same measured distance. No one has ever seen them form. Cameras struggle to capture the moment. Time-lapse recordings show footprints present in one frame and gone in the next, with no visible motion between. Video footage sometimes shows subtle shifts in gravel where no wind is blowing, then cuts out briefly before resuming. Researchers have proposed explanations involving ground pressure, delayed settling, and visual illusion. None explain why the prints appear only when visitors are present, or why they mimic movement so precisely without ever overlapping existing tracks. The straight gravel line complicates matters further. When footprints approach the line, they slow. Spacing tightens. Steps become shorter, closer together, as if hesitation has entered the movement. At the edge of the darker gravel, the prints stop completely. Visitors who step over the line feel a sudden change in air pressure, slight but noticeable. The gravel on the far side feels firmer underfoot. Sound sharpens. The sense of being followed diminishes immediately. Looking back reveals the footprints ending right at the boundary. No continuation exists beyond the line. Whatever followed does not cross. Locals avoid the yard entirely. They say the line marks a division not meant to be tested. Some claim it separates what belongs to the land from what passes through it. Others believe it is a boundary for something unfinished, something that learned how to follow but not how to arrive. Stories tell of workers who once used the yard as a staging area. Supplies were laid out. Paths were walked daily. Then one worker disappeared, leaving only a trail of prints that ended at the line. No disturbance. No signs of struggle. Just absence. Since then, gravel line yard has remained unused. No development followed. No official designation was given. It exists as a blank space on maps, labeled only by its informal name. Those who still visit describe a growing sense of anticipation the longer they remain. Not fear, exactly, but awareness. As if the yard is measuring movement, learning patterns, rehearsing steps it cannot quite complete. The footprints feel intentional. Some visitors claim that after leaving the yard, they notice gravel in places it should not be. Inside shoes. Along vehicle floors. In pockets. The stones vanish quickly, but the sensation of being followed lingers longer. Others report hearing footsteps behind them days later, always out of sight, always stopping when they turn around. The yard itself never changes. Rain does not wash the gravel away. Wind does not scatter it. The straight line remains sharp and dark, as if maintained by an unseen hand. Footprints continue to appear whenever someone walks its length. They follow faithfully. They stop abruptly. As if whatever makes them understands how to imitate movement, but not how to finish it. Standing at the edge of the tracks, visitors often feel the urge to look back one more time before leaving. The yard offers no reaction. No sound. No sign of pursuit. Only the quiet field of stone, waiting patiently for the next set of steps. And somewhere behind those steps, perfectly formed footprints will appear again, moving forward just long enough to remind anyone who walks there that they are not alone, even when nothing else can be seen. At Red Signal Yard, the tracks stretch across a wide, open plain where visibility should be perfect and nothing should go unnoticed. The yard was designed for efficiency, built with long sightlines and modern systems meant to prevent surprises. For years, trains passed through without incident, guided by signals that worked precisely as intended. Then the lights began to flicker. It happened without warning and without power. Signal lamps glowed briefly, dimmed, then brightened again, cycling through patterns that made no sense. Maintenance crews checked the systems repeatedly. Power lines were intact. Control boards showed no activity. According to every instrument, the lights should have been dark. The flickering occurred mostly at night, when the yard was quiet and sound carried easily across the tracks. From a distance, the lights appeared unstable, as if struggling to decide whether to warn or welcome approaching trains. Engineers noticed something else at the same time. Trains began to slow. Even without receiving any official signal, engines reduced speed as they passed through Red Signal Yard. Automated systems recorded the deceleration, but found no cause. Brakes were not engaged. Controls were untouched. It was as if the trains responded to something unspoken. Then came the sightings. Figures appeared on the tracks ahead, standing perfectly still. They did not wave or signal. They did not react to the approaching train. They simply stood there, facing forward, refusing to move. No person. No obstruction. Only empty rails stretching into darkness. The figures vanished the moment the train stopped. Reports accumulated quickly. Different crews described the same experience, often within days of one another. The figures varied slightly in height and shape, but all shared the same behavior. They appeared suddenly, stood their ground, and disappeared without a trace. Cameras mounted on engines captured nothing unusual. Video feeds showed clear tracks and steady movement. No silhouettes. No distortions. Yet the engineers remained certain of what they had seen. The memory was too vivid, the response too immediate to dismiss. Red Signal Yard gained a reputation. Dispatchers began warning crews ahead of time. Trains were instructed to slow regardless of signal status. Even with precautions, the sensation persisted. Engines lost momentum entering the yard, coasting as if guided by an unseen hand. The flickering lights continued. They appeared even during scheduled shutdowns, when the entire yard should have been dark. The glow was faint but unmistakable, casting brief reflections off steel rails and gravel. Maintenance workers avoided being alone there at night, uneasy with the feeling of being watched. Some noticed that the figures appeared most often near older sections of track. Records showed that those lines had been part of the original yard, built decades earlier. Accidents had occurred there over the years, most minor, some serious. None were considered unusual for a rail hub of that size. Yet the pattern lingered. Figures stood where others once had, in places where stopping too late would have mattered. Engineers who researched the history found themselves drawn to the same areas, as if something guided attention back to those points again and again. Sound behaved strangely in the yard. Footsteps echoed longer than expected. Radios crackled with brief bursts of static near the flickering signals. Wind seemed to change direction abruptly, pushing against moving trains in short, controlled bursts. Still, no physical explanation emerged. Electrical inspections found nothing capable of powering the lights. Geological surveys showed stable ground. Psychological evaluations of engineers revealed no shared condition or bias that could explain identical experiences across unrelated crews. The yard itself seemed to enforce caution. Trains that ignored early instincts to slow often experienced system warnings moments later, unrelated faults that forced reduced speed anyway. Some engineers began to believe the figures were not obstacles. They were reminders. Standing where stopping should happen. Holding position long enough to be seen, but never long enough to be struck. Their refusal to move felt deliberate, not hostile, but firm. At dawn, red signal yard returned to normal. Signals stayed dark. Trains passed through without incident. The land looked ordinary, unremarkable beneath clear daylight. But night always returned. With it came the flicker, the hesitation, and the figures on the track. Engineers learned to trust the feeling, to slow early, to acknowledge what could not be explained. Red signal yard continues to operate, officially unchanged. Yet every crew that passes through knows the rules there are different. Speed gives way to caution. Certainty gives way to instinct. And when a figure appears on the track ahead, standing silently and refusing to move, the safest response is always the same. Slow down. Because at red signal yard, the warnings do not always come from signals. Sometimes, they come from those who stand their ground long enough to be seen. The coal spine yard lies at the edge of an abandoned rail corridor where tracks once carried endless loads of fuel through the region. By day, it appears quiet and weather-worn, a field of idle rail cars resting beneath open sky. Rust creeps along metal seams. Weeds push through cracked ground. Nothing burns there anymore, yet the air never feels clean. Even now, the yard smells of smoke. It is not the sharp scent of an active fire, but something older and heavier, like residue trapped in the soil itself. The smell settles in the throat, dry and irritating, triggering sudden coughing fits that come without warning. The air looks clear, but breathing feels wrong. Coal spine yard once handled massive volumes of coal. Trains arrived day and night, unloading black dust that coated everything it touched. Workers grew used to it, wiping soot from their hands and faces before heading home. The work was hard but steady, and the yard thrived for decades before operations slowed and finally stopped. When the trains left, the smoke should have gone with them. It did not. The first complaints came from maintenance crews sent to assess the site years after closure. They reported irritation in the lungs and eyes within minutes of entering the yard. Air quality tests showed nothing unusual. Visitors described the sensation as sudden and deep, forcing them to bend forward and gasp. The coughing fades once they leave the yard, sometimes within seconds. Those who stay longer report headaches and pressure behind the eyes, as if something unseen presses inward. The rail cars remain where they were left. Long lines of them stretch across the yard, some sealed, some partially open. Their interiors are dark, coated with years of dust. During daylight, they appear empty and lifeless, nothing more than hollow steel shells. At night, the stories change. Those who return after sunset report movement where there should be none. Faces appear briefly in the shadows of the cars, visible only when light hits at the right angle. They are darkened, coated in soot, features flattened and indistinct. Eyes appear hollow, blackened by shadow rather than injury. The faces do not move closer. They remain fixed, framed by doorways or small openings, vanishing the moment light shifts or focus breaks. No sound accompanies them. No voices. No footsteps. Only the lingering smell of smoke and the urge to leave. Cameras rarely capture anything clear. Photographs show dark shapes that could be dust or shadow. Video footage occasionally flickers near open car doors, but nothing definitive appears. Witnesses insist the faces were clearer in person, more defined than any image suggests. The coughing worsens at night. Visitors say the air feels thicker after dark, heavier, as if the yard exhales when the sun goes down. Some report tasting ash despite no visible particles. Others describe a dryness that spreads across the mouth and throat, accompanied by an instinctive need to cover their face. Records show no major accidents at Coal Spine Yard. No documented fires. No mass incidents that would explain the phenomena. The site was shut down due to declining use, not disaster. Officially, nothing happened there that should still linger. Locals remain unconvinced. They speak of workers who fell ill over time, of long shifts spent breathing dust that never truly settled. They suggest the yard absorbed years of labor and strain, holding onto it long after the last train departed. These stories are shared quietly, without embellishment. Those who walk between the cars at night feel watched. The sensation comes from all directions, subtle but persistent. Turning quickly sometimes reveals a dark outline that dissolves into shadow. Standing still makes the feeling stronger, as if attention builds when acknowledged. No one reports being touched. No one hears voices calling out. The experience is passive, observational, yet deeply uncomfortable. Some visitors describe reflections in the metal. Faces seem to appear briefly in the curved steel walls, distorted and fleeting. When examined directly, the reflections vanish, leaving only the viewer staring back at themselves, breathing harder than before. The coughing always stops when people leave. The moment they cross the boundary of the yard, air feels easier to draw in. The smoke smell fades rapidly, replaced by ordinary night air. Relief comes quickly, though unease remains. Coal Spine Yard continues to deteriorate. Paint peels. Metal thins. Nature slowly presses in from the edges. Warnings have been posted. They mention unstable structures and restricted access. Nothing about smoke. Nothing about faces. Still, fewer people visit each year. Word spreads without signage. Those who return often do so only once. They remember the smell that should not exist. The coughing that began without cause. The moment they thought they saw someone standing inside a rail car that had been empty seconds before. No fires burn there now. Yet the air remembers smoke. And in the dark, among rows of silent rail cars, some say the past still looks out through blackened openings, watching, breathing, and never leaving. North Fork Rail Yard rests in a shallow basin where tracks once converged before splitting toward distant towns. During the day, the place feels empty and exposed. Sunlight reflects off dull steel rails, weeds push through cracked ties, and the wind moves freely across open ground. There is no motion, no machinery, no sign that the yard ever carried the weight of constant travel. In its active years, North Fork was a crucial junction. Trains arrived from multiple directions, slowed, shifted, and departed again. Crews worked through the night, guiding heavy engines along tight curves and switching lines with practiced efficiency. The grind of metal wheels, the sharp cry of brakes, the echo of engines pulling against steel. When the rail traffic stopped, the silence felt unnatural. The last scheduled train passed through decades ago. Equipment was removed, signals shut down, and offices closed. Rails remained in place, too costly to dismantle. The yard became a forgotten stretch of land, avoided by travelers and overlooked by maps. During daylight hours, nothing seems out of place. The tracks lie still. No vibration hums beneath the ground. The air feels ordinary. Night changes everything. After sunset, when temperatures drop and the air grows dense, sound begins to return. It starts faintly, almost mistaken for distant wind. A high-pitched screech rises from the far end of the yard, sharp and unmistakable. The sound of metal wheels under strain. It grows louder, traveling along the rails, moving steadily toward the center. Then it passes through. Listeners describe the sound as dynamic, not static. It shifts position clearly, moving from one side of the yard to the other. The pitch rises and falls as if a heavy train is braking, releasing, then braking again. The noise fades briefly, only to return moments later from the opposite direction. The sound follows the same route every time. It reaches a certain point, slows, reverses, and travels back along the rails it just traced. There is no engine noise, no horn, no vibration felt underfoot. Only the screech of wheels meeting steel, endlessly repeating the same motion. Those who stand still long enough can map its path. Security cameras placed around the yard capture no movement. Tracks remain empty. No lights appear. No shadows shift. Yet the audio recordings confirm the reports. The sound is real, directional, and consistent. It behaves exactly as a train would, except nothing ever arrives. Local residents hear it from miles away. The noise carries cleanly through the night air, bouncing off hills and tree lines. People wake believing a freight train has passed too close to their homes. Stepping outside reveals quiet roads and still fields. The sound continues somewhere beyond sight, pacing the same invisible route. Attempts to locate the source have failed. Investigators followed the sound along the tracks, moving with it as it passed. No matter how quickly they repositioned, the noise remained ahead or behind them, never overlapping with their location. Standing directly on the rails changed nothing. The screech passed through the space without interacting with it. At times, the sound accelerates. The back and forth motion shortens, the reversal points tightening as if the loop itself is compressing. The pitch sharpens, rising in intensity before abruptly slowing again. Those present during these moments report a sense of pressure, as if the air vibrates too tightly around the ears. Despite the intensity, no damage is recorded. Rails show no fresh wear. Sensors detect no heat buildup. The ground remains still. Even wildlife avoids the yard during active nights, retreating to the surrounding fields until the sound fades near dawn. Historical records offer one possible connection. Years before closure, a late-night incident involved a heavily loaded train entering the yard under poor conditions. Reports describe a failure to stop cleanly, followed by confusion over track alignment. The train was eventually secured, and no major damage was recorded. The incident was considered resolved, filed away without further note. Some believe the sound follows that unresolved motion. Not the train itself, but the moment of stress and repetition. The constant braking, reversing, and repositioning burned into the rails through repetition and weight. Night after night of similar movement shaped the yard into a loop of expectation. When conditions align, the pattern resumes without the machine that created it. Others suggest the yard functions as an acoustic trap. Cold air, metal, and open space combine to carry distant industrial sounds in strange ways. But this theory fails to explain the precision of the movement. The exact reversals. The consistent timing. The way the sound behaves as if constrained to the rails themselves. Those who remain in the yard too long describe fatigue and disorientation. The looping sound makes it difficult to judge time. Minutes feel extended. Direction loses clarity as the noise shifts repeatedly. Some report feeling compelled to follow it, drawn along the tracks without understanding why. Leaving the yard breaks the effect immediately. As dawn approaches, the sound slows. The screech stretches, each pass taking longer than the last. Eventually, It fades into the distance and does not return. Morning reveals a silent yard once more. Dew settles on the rails. Birds return. The land looks unchanged. North Fork Rail Yard offers no warning. During the day, it appears harmless and empty. At night, it remembers motion too deeply to rest. The sound returns, tracing a path that no longer exists. Repeating a journey with no destination. A train that never arrives. A loop that never completes. Metal wheels screaming into the dark, traveling endlessly back and forth, as if the yard itself refuses to let the movement end. The broken coupler yard stretches along a forgotten rail spur where iron once moved endlessly through the night. Rusted tracks cut through gravel and oil-stained earth, disappearing into tall weeds at both ends. Boxcars sit frozen in place, their paint peeled away by years of wind and neglect. The yard feels heavy before anything unusual happens, as if the air itself remembers weight. This place earned its name through repetition. During its years of operation, accidents were frequent and severe. Couplers failed without warning. Loads shifted unexpectedly. Chains snapped or tightened when they should not have. Records described sudden impacts, crushing force, and workers caught beneath machinery that moved faster than reaction allowed. Over time, the yard gained a reputation no amount of repair could erase. Eventually, operations ceased. Today, Broken Coupler Yard is silent by design. No trains pass through. No equipment is maintained. Warning signs hang crooked, their lettering faded but still legible. Despite this, people continue to visit, drawn by curiosity or the belief that abandoned places eventually become harmless. They are often wrong. The first thing visitors notice is the chains. They hang from cranes, hooks, and loading frames scattered across the yard. Thick iron links, dark with corrosion, suspended loosely in the still air. During the day, they appear motionless. At night, they move. Without warning, a chain begins to sway. Not gently. Not with the rhythm of wind. It jerks sharply, as if pulled by sudden force, then swings wide and fast, rattling violently against metal supports. Other chains follow, some lagging behind, others responding instantly, creating a chaotic pattern of motion across the yard. There is no wind strong enough to explain it. Witnesses report the chains moving in bursts, stopping abruptly, then resuming with greater intensity. Some describe the sound as deafening, metal striking metal in uneven rhythms that echo off empty boxcars and concrete walls. Others notice the motion traveling across the yard, one chain activating after another, like a wave of tension being released. Standing too close feels dangerous. Visitors describe a sudden pressure that arrives without warning. A heavy sensation centered on the chest, pushing inward and downward. Breathing becomes difficult. Limbs feel weak. Some instinctively crouch or brace themselves, convinced something massive is about to fall. Nothing does. The pressure intensifies for several seconds, then fades just as abruptly. Those unfamiliar with the yard sometimes dismiss the experience as panic or imagination. The pressure always arrives suddenly. It always centers on the chest. Those who experience it often report lingering soreness, as if muscles were strained without movement. Investigators have attempted to recreate the conditions. Instruments record no spikes in air pressure. Seismic activity remains normal. Magnetic readings fluctuate slightly but not enough to explain physical sensation. Video footage captures chains swinging without visible cause, sometimes accelerating against gravity rather than with it. Audio recordings reveal low-frequency vibrations beneath the sound of clashing metal. Frequencies felt more than heard, capable of causing discomfort and disorientation. Even so, the strength and precision of the pressure remain unexplained. Locals offer a simpler explanation. They say the yard remembers weight. During its operation, broken coupler yard handled immense loads. Steel, machinery, freight stacked beyond safe limits. Workers relied on timing and trust, often placing themselves beneath suspended weight with only seconds to spare. When failures occurred, there was no escape. According to local belief, that moment never left. The yard, they say, learned the sensation of crushing force. It absorbed the impact, the panic, the sudden stillness that followed. Now, with no trains to move and no workers to guide it, the energy discharges on its own. Through swinging chains. Through invisible pressure. At night, the phenomenon grows stronger. Chains rattle more violently. Shadows jump across the gravel as metal swings without pattern. Visitors report feeling watched, not by eyes, but by mass. As if the yard itself is leaning toward them, testing weight and balance. Some describe hearing muffled sounds beneath the clanging. Not voices, but strained breaths. The dull thud of impact echoing faintly, repeating without resolution. Former workers avoid the area entirely. They say the yard does not distinguish between past and present. That anyone standing beneath its machinery becomes part of the cycle. Not harmed outright, but reminded. Pressed into memory through sensation rather than sight. Attempts to remove the chains have failed. Crews sent to dismantle equipment report sudden illness, dizziness, and intense chest pressure that forces them to retreat. Tools jam unexpectedly. Machinery stalls. Chains become impossible to secure, swinging violently even when anchored. The project is always abandoned. By morning, the yard returns to stillness. Chains hang limp. Visitors arriving during daylight often doubt the reports until they return after dark. Those who do rarely stay long. Broken coupler yard remains fenced but accessible. Official warnings cite unstable structures and hazardous debris. None mention the pressure, or the chains that move without cause. Yet the stories persist. People say the yard does not want attention. It reacts when presence lingers, when weight shifts across its gravel. The chains swing not in anger, but in memory. The pressure does not seek harm, only recognition. Standing there, beneath rusted iron and silent cranes, it becomes clear why the accidents never stopped. The yard was never empty of danger. It simply waited. And when the chains begin to swing, and the invisible weight settles heavily on the chest, visitors understand what it means to be beneath something that never truly lets go. At Cold Iron Yard, the tracks stretch through a shallow basin of steel and gravel where cold air settles easily. During the day, the yard appears ordinary, sun reflecting off rails, engines moving through on schedule, workers following familiar routines. Nothing about the place suggests what happens after midnight. Temperatures begin to fall with unnatural speed. Even in the height of summer, warmth drains from the air as though pulled downward into the ground. Metal surfaces grow cold to the touch. Breath turns visible in pale clouds that linger longer than expected, drifting slowly instead of dispersing. Workers noticed it first. Night crews reported sudden chills while performing routine checks. Jackets were pulled tighter. Hands numbed quickly. Instruments showed drops far beyond forecasted lows, yet surrounding areas remained unchanged. Step outside the yard perimeter, and the air felt normal again. Inside Cold Iron Yard, cold ruled the night. The rails seemed to absorb heat, radiating chill upward through boots and bones. Gravel stiffened underfoot. Even engines idling nearby felt distant, their warmth swallowed by the atmosphere. Sound changed too, growing sharper and thinner, as if carried through frozen air. Then the figures appeared. Wrapped in heavy coats, they walked slowly along the tracks, heads lowered, movements deliberate and unhurried. Their clothing looked outdated, thick layers suited for harsh winters that no longer came to the region. Faces were rarely visible, obscured by collars, shadows, or drifting mist. They did not acknowledge the living. The figures followed the rails precisely, stepping between ties with practiced ease. They never crossed into work areas. They never approached equipment. They simply walked, parallel to the steel lines, as if inspecting or patrolling. When workers called out, the figures did not respond. As distance closed, they faded. Not abruptly, but gradually, dissolving into the mist that thickened around them. One moment they were solid, boots touching gravel. The next, only fog remained, swirling where someone had just stood. The cold intensified during these moments. Breath grew heavier. Fingers stiffened. Some workers reported feeling pressure behind the eyes, a dull ache that faded only after leaving the yard. No one reported being touched. The figures maintained distance, always just far enough away to observe. Cameras installed throughout Cold Iron Yard failed to capture them. Footage showed empty tracks and drifting mist, nothing more. Yet temperature sensors recorded sharp drops at the exact time sightings occurred. The cold followed a pattern, deepening as figures appeared, easing only after they vanished. Maintenance crews investigated relentlessly. Heating systems were checked. Drainage was inspected. Geological surveys ruled out underground ice pockets or cold air vents. The history of the yard offered clues. Cold Iron Yard had once been a hub during an era of brutal winters and constant rail traffic. Over the years, accidents happened. Nothing unusual for a rail yard of its size, yet patterns emerged. Many incidents occurred during winter nights. Many involved workers exposed to extreme cold for extended periods. Names appeared repeatedly in old logs, men known for staying on duty despite harsh conditions. Some never left the yard. Locals believed the figures were those workers, continuing tasks that had defined their lives. Wrapped in coats because cold was all they remembered. Walking the tracks because that was where they belonged. The idea unsettled crews, but it matched what they saw. The figures never strayed from the rails. Moved with purpose, not confusion. They faded only when approached, as if unwilling to cross a boundary between past and present. Midnight marked the beginning. Almost every report placed the first temperature drop within minutes of 12. The cold peaked between 1 and 3 in the morning, then slowly retreated. By dawn, Cold Iron Yard returned to normal. Breath no longer showed. Hands warmed. The mist lifted. Day crews noticed nothing unusual. They walked the same tracks, stood in the same places, unaware of the night shift experience. Without the cold, without the mist, the yard felt empty in a different way. Night after night, the pattern repeated. New workers learned quickly to dress for winter regardless of season. They kept moving to stay warm. They avoided following the figures, understanding instinctively that distance mattered. Those who stayed still too long felt the cold sink deeper. Some described the sensation of time slowing, minutes stretching thin, the world narrowing to breath and fog. Leaving the yard broke the effect immediately, warmth returning as soon as the perimeter was crossed. The figures never followed. They remained within Cold Iron Yard, bound to its tracks and schedules. Their presence did not threaten. It observed. It persisted. Engineers passing through noticed the change too. As trains entered the yard after midnight, speed dropped naturally, engines responding to resistance in the air. Metal contracted with sharp sounds. Steam rose thicker than expected, clouds mixing with mist until rails vanished from sight. Through that haze, figures moved. Always walking. Always fading. Cold Iron Yard continues to operate, officially unchanged. Schedules remain intact. Equipment functions normally. Reports are logged without explanation. Yet everyone who works the night shift understands the truth of the place. Breath turns visible even in summer. And along the tracks, figures wrapped in heavy coats walk steadily through mist, carrying the memory of work that never truly ended. Signal House Yard stretches across a quiet stretch of rail where tracks once converged and decisions were made in seconds. Switches rust in fixed positions. Signal arms remain raised or lowered without purpose. At the center of it all stands the control building, a narrow structure of brick and reinforced glass that should no longer function. It does. By day, the building appears dormant. Windows are dusty but intact. Doors remain locked, paint peeling in long strips. Power lines leading toward the structure were cut years ago, yet the interior never feels completely dark. Even in sunlight, the glass reflects something deeper than empty rooms. At night, the lights turn on. They do not follow a schedule. One window glows briefly, then goes dark. Another illuminates moments later on the opposite side of the building. Sometimes several rooms light up at once, casting pale rectangles across the gravel yard. Other times, a single bulb flickers on and stays lit for hours. No external power source has ever been found. Rail workers first noticed the lights while passing through after operation ceased. But when calls went unanswered and the lights continued night after night, concern grew. Inspections during daylight found nothing unusual. No wiring was active. No generators were present. Then the voices were heard. They came through the walls of the control building, muffled but unmistakable. Two or more voices speaking at once, overlapping in sharp tones. The argument sounded focused and intense, as if decisions were being debated under pressure. Words could not be clearly identified, but the emotion was evident. Raised voices. Interruptions. Frustration. When someone approached the building, the voices stopped. The silence was immediate and complete. No fading. No trailing sound. Just the sudden absence of noise, as if a switch had been thrown. The lights often went dark at the same moment, leaving the building cold and unresponsive. Investigators attempted to capture the phenomenon. Audio equipment recorded long stretches of nothing, interrupted by brief bursts of sound that cut out mid-sentence. Video footage showed lights turning on without visible cause, then shutting off as soon as motion sensors detected approach. The timing was consistent enough to suggest awareness. Inside the building, everything remains untouched. Desks sit neatly arranged. Control panels are intact, their dials frozen in place. Paper logs rest in drawers, yellowed but orderly. Chairs remain tucked in, as if their occupants stood up and never returned. Dust lies evenly across surfaces, undisturbed. No signs of recent entry have ever been found. Doors remain locked from the inside. Windows are sealed. There are no hidden access points. Yet the building behaves as if occupied, responding to attention with practiced precision. Those who linger outside report a growing unease. The closer they stand, the stronger the sense of interruption becomes, as if their presence disrupts something ongoing. The building feels tense, expectant. Stepping back often results in lights returning and voices resuming, arguing once more behind brick and glass. The arguments never repeat exactly. Listeners describe different rhythms, different emotional tones. Sometimes the voices sound hurried. Other times, they slow, measured and strained. There is no pattern to the timing, only the consistent rule that they stop when noticed. Former rail employees recognize the setting. They say the control building would have been busiest during peak operations, when delays or errors could cause serious consequences. Decisions were made quickly, disagreements resolved under pressure. There was no documented accident, no recorded emergency tied to Signal House Yard. Operations declined gradually. Staff were reassigned. The building was closed and secured. Officially, nothing was left unfinished. Yet the arguments suggest otherwise. At night, shadows shift behind the glass when lights are on. Not clearly defined shapes, but movement consistent with people passing between rooms. These movements stop instantly when observed directly, leaving the illuminated spaces empty once more. Attempts to enter the building after dark have failed. Keys no longer work when lights are on. Locks resist turning. The door feels solid and immovable, as if braced from the inside. When the lights go dark, the door opens easily, revealing the same silent, empty interior. Some visitors report hearing their own names spoken softly. The yard around the building feels different at night. Sound carries oddly. Footsteps echo too long, then not at all. The air feels charged, heavy with anticipation. Standing still makes the sensation stronger, as if the building is waiting to resume once it is alone again. Locals avoid the area after sunset. They know the pattern well. Lights appear. Voices rise. Silence falls when approached. No one stays long enough to challenge it further. The control building remains standing, sealed and watchful, its interior frozen in readiness. Sometimes, when no one is nearby, the lights stay on longer than usual. Voices argue without interruption. Decisions are debated that will never be acted upon. And when footsteps approach, the building falls silent once more, as if the conversation was never meant to be heard, only continued, endlessly, behind walls that refuse to forget. The East Spur Yard stretches across a low plain where tracks once branched toward factories and storage depots. Rusted rails curve gently through gravel and weeds, their alignment still precise despite years of neglect. During the day, the yard feels open and quiet, exposed beneath wide sky. Wind moves freely across the empty space, stirring loose metal and carrying the faint scent of oil that never fully faded. When it was operational, East Spur handled heavy freight. Long trains rolled in slowly, guided through complex switches before being redirected down narrow spurs. The work required patience and coordination, especially at night. Engines idled for hours. The yard was loud, busy, and unforgiving of mistakes. The derailment happened after sunset. Details are limited, preserved mostly in brief reports and second-hand accounts. Somewhere along the spur, alignment failed. Metal left metal. Cars lurched sideways, tearing free from their intended path. The sound was described as overwhelming. That carried far beyond the yard. Emergency crews arrived quickly. But the damage was extensive. Tracks were twisted. Several cars lay at unnatural angles. Their weight pressing deep into the ground. Cleanup took weeks. Repairs stretched longer. Eventually, the decision was made to close the yard entirely. Traffic was rerouted. East Spur fell silent. Years later, visitors began reporting sudden sounds with no warning. A sharp metallic cry cutting through stillness, echoing across the yard before vanishing as quickly as it arrived. The noise resembled the moment of failure, when steel gives way under force. It did not repeat predictably. It simply occurred. Along with the sound came sensation. Those standing on the gravel felt the ground vibrate beneath their feet, brief but unmistakable. The vibration traveled along the tracks, then disappeared. Witnesses described the experience as disorienting. The sound and movement rarely aligned with visible cues. No dust rose. No objects shifted. The rails themselves did not move. Yet the feeling suggested momentum, weight, and speed. People instinctively stepped back, bracing for impact that never came. Night amplified the effect. After dark, the yard's emptiness deepened. Sound carried farther. Shadows stretched across the tracks. The metallic screams seemed louder, sharper, echoing off distant structures before dissolving into silence. Vibrations felt stronger, traveling through the soles of boots and into the legs, lingering just long enough to raise pulse and breath. Recordings captured fragments of the sound, but never its full presence. Microphones picked up distorted frequencies, sudden spikes that ended abruptly. Seismographs placed nearby registered brief localized activity, too weak to classify as seismic events, too focused to dismiss entirely. No consistent source was identified. Investigators considered environmental factors. Temperature changes causing metal contraction. Wind interacting with loose components. Underground activity. Each explanation fell short. The sounds occurred under varying conditions. The vibrations followed the track layout rather than natural fault lines. Local belief shifted toward memory. The idea that extreme force leaves an imprint, not just visually, but spatially. That the moment of derailment pressed itself into the yard so deeply it occasionally reasserts itself. Not as a replay, but as a residual release of stored stress. Those familiar with the incident note that the screams often originate near the point of initial failure. The vibrations follow the same direction the train would have traveled had it remained intact. The sequence lasts only seconds, but feels complete, as if an invisible mass has passed through and exited the space. People who linger report lingering unease. After repeated exposure, some experience headaches or ringing in the ears. Others describe a sense of anticipation, as if waiting for something to arrive. Standing still becomes uncomfortable. Movement feels necessary, though direction remains unclear. Despite warnings, curiosity draws visitors. Urban explorers walk the tracks at night, listening for the sound. Some capture it. Others wait for hours and hear nothing. Those who do experience it often struggle to describe it fully. Words fail to convey the combination of sound and motion. The way the yard seems briefly alive with force. At dawn, the yard returns to normal. Light reveals nothing out of place. Rails lie undisturbed. Gravel sits evenly. The air is still. It is difficult to believe anything unusual occurred hours before. The absence feels intentional, as if the yard resets itself with daylight. East Spur Yard does not announce its history. There are no signs, no memorials, no markers explaining why the tracks end abruptly or why switches remain locked in place. The land holds its story quietly, releasing fragments only when conditions allow. The metal screams do not warn. They do not repeat the past for clarity or closure. They emerge without pattern, echo briefly, and vanish. The vibrations follow, subtle but undeniable, like the wake of something too heavy to see. Those who stand there in the moment feel it clearly. The impression of speed. The pressure of mass. The certainty that something just passed through the space, obeying paths laid long ago. By day, it is empty ground and rusted rail. By night, it remembers motion too intense to fade completely. And when the sound returns, screaming through the dark. The ground answers in kind, trembling as if the past has found a way to move once more. Switchblade Yard lies beyond the last maintained rail line, where tracks split and rejoin in tangled patterns across an open stretch of gravel and steel. During the day, it looks dormant. Rust coats the rails. Weeds push up between ties that have not felt vibration in years. The first sound is always grinding. Metal drags against metal with a force that feels deliberate, slow at first, then growing louder. The sound echoes across the open ground, bouncing between boxcars and signal posts, carrying far beyond where it should. Visitors who hear it describe the sound as wrong in timing and tone. Rail switches are not meant to move alone. They require force, alignment, intention. Yet in Switchblade Yard, the switches grind back and forth in the darkness, changing routes that lead nowhere. Standing near the tracks feels unsettling even before the motion begins. The air seems thicker, charged with anticipation. Gravel crunches loudly underfoot, then falls silent as if the ground itself is listening. When the switches move, the ground vibrates faintly. Steel blades slide across rails with heavy resistance, locking into place, then reversing without pause. The motion repeats, sometimes cycling rapidly, sometimes stopping for long stretches before resuming with sudden urgency. The yard sounds busy again, as if preparing for traffic that will never come. Those who approach too closely experience something else. A sudden force presses outward against the body, firm and unmistakable. It does not strike or throw. It pushes. Hands against the chest. Pressure at the shoulders. A steady shove that grows stronger the closer one steps toward the switches. Most stumble backward instinctively. The sensation feels intentional. Balanced. As though something unseen is maintaining distance rather than attacking. Visitors describe being guided away from the tracks, redirected toward safer ground whether they wish it or not. Those who resist feel the pressure increase. Breathing becomes shallow. Muscles tense. The push shifts position, adjusting as the person moves, always applying force in the direction away from the active rails. No matter where one stands, the pressure finds leverage, urging retreat. Once a safe distance is reached, the force vanishes instantly. No lingering sensation remains, except unease. Investigations into Switchblade Yard have yielded little explanation. Motion sensors trigger without cause. Switch indicators change positions on their own, recorded clearly on monitoring equipment. Power sources remain disconnected. Manual controls are locked or corroded beyond use. Footage shows levers moving smoothly despite visible rust and resistance. The blades align perfectly every time, never derailing, never jamming. The history of the site offers clues, but no answers. Switchblade Yard was once a critical junction, routing heavy freight through multiple lines at all hours. Mistakes here were costly. A single misaligned switch could send a train onto the wrong track with catastrophic results. Records show numerous near misses and several serious incidents narrowly avoided by quick action. According to old accounts, a particularly dangerous shift occurred during a stormy night when visibility was poor and signals failed repeatedly. Crews worked in darkness and rain, manually adjusting switches under extreme pressure. Every movement mattered. Every second counted. After that night, the yard was never the same. Reports of switches shifting slightly on their own began almost immediately. A lever found out of position. A route changed without record. Over time, the movements grew bolder, more frequent. Until the yard was deemed unsafe and shut down. Locals believe the yard learned vigilance. They say the switches remember the responsibility they once carried. That the pressure of keeping trains aligned, of preventing disaster, imprinted itself into the metal and stone. Now, with no crews to guide it, the yard continues its duty alone. Redirecting paths. Pushing people away. At night, the grinding grows louder near the center of the junction, where the most complex switches intersect. The sound overlaps, multiple blades shifting at once, creating a chorus of metal that rises and falls in intensity. Standing too close during these moments feels impossible, as if the air itself becomes solid. Some visitors report hearing muffled vibrations beneath the grinding. A low hum that resonates through bone rather than ear. Others feel subtle changes in direction when walking, as if nudged gently aside even before approaching danger. The yard does not allow accidents. No one has been pulled onto the tracks. Every report ends the same way, with visitors forced backward, away from harm, by unseen pressure that refuses to relent. The yard is not hostile. It is protective. Attempts to dismantle or disable the switches have failed. Equipment breaks unexpectedly. Workers feel intense resistance when trying to secure blades in fixed positions. Bolts loosen on their own. Tools slip from hands at critical moments. Projects are abandoned quietly. By morning, switchblade yard appears inert again. Switches sit motionless. The yard waits. The switches begin to move again. Grinding loudly. Methodically. Aligning routes that no longer serve trains, but still enforce boundaries. Anyone who steps too close will feel it. The steady push. The unseen hands. Rust Hollow Yard stretches across a shallow basin where abandoned railcars sit in long, uneven rows. The metal shells are coated in layers of rust, peeling paint, and wind-blown dust, giving the entire yard a reddish-brown hue that deepens at sunset. Nothing moves there anymore, yet the place never feels still. The yard was once a transfer point, busy with activity and noise. Freight cars arrived daily, loaded and unloaded with strict schedules and practiced efficiency. Over time, routes changed, demand shifted, and Rust Hollow Yard was slowly phased out. Cars were left behind, intended to be removed later. Later never came. The first reports were easy to dismiss. Visitors spoke of shapes in the metal, patterns that looked almost human when light hit them at certain angles. Faces seemed to form briefly in rusted panels, eyes suggested by dark pits, mouths traced by jagged lines. Blink, and they were gone, replaced by ordinary corrosion. Rust Hollow Yard is full of texture. Light changes quickly there, reflecting off uneven surfaces and broken glass. The mind fills in gaps. That explanation satisfied most people, until the marks appeared. Deep scratch marks began showing up on the cars. They were not random. They appeared in clusters, long grooves dragged through thick rust down to bare metal. Some ran vertically, others diagonally, as though something had gripped the surface and pulled away with force. No tools were found nearby. Animals were ruled out. Weather could not account for them either. They appeared overnight, often on cars that had been undisturbed for years. Those who returned to inspect the marks noticed something else. Faces appeared more frequently near the scratched areas. A visitor might pause beside a car, studying a rusted door, when features seemed to emerge. A hollowed stare. A strained expression. The impression lasted only a moment, vanishing as soon as focus shifted. Looking away, then back, revealed nothing. But the scratch marks remained. Over time, patterns emerged. The faces never appeared on freshly rusted metal. They formed only on older cars, those that had been in the yard since its final years of operation. The deepest scratches appeared on the same cars repeatedly, as if drawn back to them. Historians examined old records. Rust Hollow Yard had been the site of several incidents during its active years. Nothing dramatic enough to close it outright, but enough to leave a mark on those who worked there. Long shifts. Heavy labor. Injuries that went unreported to keep schedules moving. Arguments were common. Tempers flared. Some left suddenly, never returning. Others stayed longer than they should have, worn down but unwilling to walk away. Those cars held more than cargo. Visitors walking through the yard described a sense of being watched. The feeling intensified near the older rows, where rust flaked away in sheets and shadows lingered between cars. Sound behaved oddly there, footsteps echoing longer than expected, then cutting off abruptly. The faces appeared in moments of stillness. Standing too long beside a single car increased the chance of seeing one. A faint impression first, then clearer detail. Brows furrowed. Teeth barely suggested beneath corrosion. Expressions locked somewhere between strain and release. No two faces looked the same. They vanished the instant movement resumed. Turning the head, shifting weight, or blinking too slowly erased them. Only the memory lingered, sharp and unsettling. Then came the scratches beneath fresh eyes. Visitors who swore a car had been untouched moments earlier found new marks cutting through rust where a face had appeared. The grooves were warm to the touch at first, then cooled quickly, blending back into the metal. No sound accompanied their creation. There was no screech, no impact. The scratches simply existed, as though the metal had been scored from the inside outward. Some believed the yard was settling. Metal contracts and expands. Rust flakes. Structures shift. But no natural process explains marks that appear suddenly and selectively, tied to moments of observation. Those who stayed too long reported headaches and fatigue. The air felt heavy, pressing down even in open space. Leaving the yard brought immediate relief. Breathing eased. The sense of pressure lifted. Authorities considered clearing Rust Hollow Yard. Plans were drawn, budgets discussed. Each time, delays occurred. Equipment malfunctioned. Crews reported discomfort and refused extended work periods. Eventually, the idea was abandoned. The yard remains untouched. Wind moves through broken windows and open compartments. Rust continues its slow work. The cars wait, silent and lined up like a frozen procession. Faces still appear. Only for a second. Only when someone looks directly at the metal and lets their focus linger. Blink, and they are gone, replaced by streaks of corrosion and shadow. The scratches continue to deepen. Layer by layer, rust is stripped away, revealing bright metal beneath before time dulls it again. Each mark adds to the yard's quiet record, evidence of something repeating without announcement. Rust Hollow Yard does not chase visitors. It does not call out or block exits. See the faces, and they disappear. Ignore the scratches, and they multiply. The yard holds its history in metal and rust, revealing it briefly, then hiding it again, leaving behind only marks that cannot explain themselves. And those who walk away carry the certainty that something in Rust Hollow Yard is still trying to be seen. Dead Rail Crossing Yard sits at the edge of a long abandoned stretch of track where rails fade into gravel and weeds. The crossing itself remains intact, marked by faded signs and a signal mast that no longer connects to any active line. Locals avoid it all the same. The yard feels wrong in a way that is difficult to explain. The air seems heavier near the crossing, as if sound and movement struggle to pass through. Vehicles slow instinctively when approaching, even when drivers have no clear reason to do so. Those who know the area well take longer routes without hesitation. The bells are the reason most often given. They ring without warning, clear and metallic, echoing across the empty yard. The sound is unmistakable, the same alert once used to warn of approaching trains. Yet no trains run there now. The tracks are inactive, disconnected miles away, incapable of carrying anything heavier than wind and dust. The bells ring anyway. Sometimes the sound lasts only a few seconds. Other times it continues in steady intervals, as if a train were passing through at a constant speed. The crossing arms do not lower. The lights do not flash. Only the bells ring, filling the open space with a warning that serves no purpose. Visitors who stop to listen often regret it. At first, the sound seems distant, even manageable. But as minutes pass, pressure builds behind the eyes. A dull ache forms at the base of the skull. Ears begin to ring in response, a high-pitched tone layered beneath the bells themselves. The ringing in the ears grows louder, persistent, drowning out other sounds even after the bells fall silent. Leaving the yard brings relief. The symptoms fade gradually with distance, easing within minutes once the crossing is no longer visible. Rail officials have investigated multiple times. They confirm the crossing is inactive. Power lines have been cut. Control systems were removed years ago. There is no mechanism capable of producing sound. The bells themselves show no physical movement when heard, remaining still even as they ring. Audio recordings capture the phenomenon clearly. Some report lingering effects for hours, a faint echo of pressure or sound that eventually disappears. Others say the experience leaves them unsettled long after the discomfort passes. Playback reveals the bells sounding as expected, sharp and rhythmic. There is no distortion, no interference. Yet no vibration accompanies the sound. The source remains untraceable, as if the noise exists without origin. The yard has no history of major incidents. Records show routine operations, minor delays, nothing that would explain ongoing disturbances. No accidents occurred at the crossing after its closure. Officially, the site holds no significance beyond its former function. Local stories suggest otherwise. They speak of near misses, of trains passing too fast in the final years of operation. They mention moments when bells rang too late, when drivers hesitated, when decisions were made in seconds that could not be undone. These accounts vary, shared quietly and without detail. Those who approach the crossing at night report stronger effects. The bells sound closer then, more immediate. Some describe feeling disoriented, as if direction becomes unclear. Light behaves strangely, headlights seeming dimmer near the tracks. Standing near the signal mast intensifies the sensation. The headache deepens rapidly. Breathing feels shallow. Thoughts become difficult to organize, narrowing focus to escape. No one reports seeing trains. No lights appear on the horizon. No vibrations move through the rails. The bells ring alone, warning of nothing visible, insisting on attention without offering explanation. Attempts to disable the bells have failed. Physical inspections show no damage, nowhere consistent with use. Removing components does not stop the sound. Bells have been replaced entirely, only for the phenomenon to continue unchanged. The sound does not depend on the hardware itself. The crossing seems to exist in a different state. Time feels uneven near it. Moments stretch longer than expected. Silence feels charged, as if waiting to break. When the bells finally stop, the absence feels abrupt, leaving behind a faint ringing that does not belong to the ears alone. Locals mark the yard with caution. They teach children not to linger. They warn travelers passing through not to stop, not to investigate, not to test the stories. Most heed the advice after hearing the bells once. Those who ignore it rarely stay long. The discomfort drives them away before curiosity can overcome instinct. The yard does not invite exploration. It repels it, firmly and efficiently, without threat or display. Dead rail crossing yard remains unchanged. The tracks rust slowly. Signs fade. Grass grows taller each season. Yet the bells continue to ring, clear and purposeful, echoing across empty ground. They warn of danger that cannot be seen. And those who listen too long learn why the crossing is avoided. leaving with aching heads, ringing ears. And the certainty that some warnings do not need trains to be real. The lantern loop yard lies at the far edge of an abandoned rail network, where tracks curve inward and circle back on themselves, before disappearing into weeds and gravel. During the day the yard looks unremarkable. Rusted rails sit quietly beneath open sky. Old signal posts lean at slight angles. Nothing moves, nothing hums. The place feels finished. At the center of the loop stands a single metal pole light. It rises from a concrete base cracked by time, its surface streaked with rust and peeling paint. The wiring that once fed it should no longer function. Power lines were removed decades ago when the yard was shut down. Transformers were dismantled. Control buildings were emptied and sealed. By every practical measure, the light should be dead. It is not. Each night, precisely at midnight, the pole light flickers on. The glow is weak at first, sputtering as if struggling to wake. Then it steadies into a pale circle that spills across the gravel below. The surrounding yard remains dark. No other lights respond. Only the lantern stands illuminated, isolated in a wide field of shadow. And every time it lights, a figure stands beneath it. Witnesses describe the figure as human in shape, average in height, motionless. It appears centered perfectly under the glow, as if placed there deliberately. Details are difficult to discern. The light does not reach the face clearly. Clothing appears dark and indistinct, blending into the night beyond the circle of illumination. The figure does not move. No shift in posture. No turn of the head. Arms hang naturally at the sides. Feet remain planted. Those who observe from a distance often feel compelled to approach, drawn by the unnatural symmetry of the scene. As they move closer, the figure remains unchanged. No footsteps are heard. The gravel beneath the light shows no disturbance. No impressions form. Even when the figure has been visible for several minutes, the ground remains smooth and undisturbed, as if nothing stands there at all. The light stays on for exactly 3 minutes. Then it flickers again, dims, and shuts off completely. The yard returns to darkness. When the light goes out, the figure is gone. Not fading. Not retreating. Simply absent. Flashlights reveal only empty ground beneath the pole. Those who remain after the light extinguishes report an immediate sense of release, as if pressure in the air has lifted. Breathing feels easier. Sound returns. Insects resume movement. The yard feels empty again. The cycle repeats every night. Rail workers once avoided the lantern loop yard during late shifts even before it was abandoned. Records mention a habit of checking watches and leaving the loop area before midnight without explanation. No formal reports describe the figure, but several personal notes reference the light being unreliable, coming on when it should not. After closure, the phenomenon became more noticeable. Explorers attempting to trace the power source found none. Underground cables were severed. Electrical readings showed no current flowing before or after activation. The light behaved as if drawing energy from nothing, switching on and off with precise timing regardless of weather or season. Cameras placed to monitor the yard capture the event consistently. At midnight, the light activates. The figure appears simultaneously, already standing in place. No arrival is recorded. No approach. It is simply there when the light comes on. Audio recordings reveal silence. No wind movement changes. No mechanical hum accompanies the light. The figure produces no sound. Even environmental noise drops slightly during the illumination, as if the yard itself pauses. Attempts to interact have failed. Those who shine lights toward the figure see no reaction. Moving closer does not alter its posture. At a certain distance, some report a strong urge to stop walking, an instinctive hesitation that feels physical rather than emotional. No one has crossed directly into the circle of light. Those who attempt to describe why say the space feels occupied in a way that discourages intrusion. Not threatening, but absolute. As if the spot beneath the lantern belongs to something already in place. Local theories vary. Some believe the figure represents a night watchman who once worked the loop, assigned to stand beneath the light while trains cycled through the yard. Others suggest it is the echo of a routine, preserved through repetition and isolation. A moment repeated so often it continues without the person who performed it. There are no reports of aggression. The figure does not pursue. It does not acknowledge observers. It does not change behavior. It simply stands, waiting beneath a light that should not work, in a yard that should not remember. Rain falls through the light. Fog softens its edges. Snow collects on the ground and still the figure stands, unchanged. The light never burns out. Midnight arrives, and the yard responds. Those who watch repeatedly report a growing sense of familiarity. Not comfort, but recognition. As if the scene is not meant to surprise, only to persist. The repetition becomes expected, almost ritualistic. When the light shuts off, some feel a brief sense of absence, like something essential has stepped away. At dawn, the lantern loop yard offers no trace of the night. The pole stands unlit. The ground is empty. No footprints. No heat. No residue. Daylight reveals rust and neglect, nothing more. It is easy to believe the stories are exaggerated, shaped by darkness and imagination. Until midnight comes again. The light flickers on. The figure stands beneath it. And when the light goes out, the yard returns to silence, as if nothing was ever there at all. Old Union Yard sits at the edge of a city that moved on without it. Rusted rails cut through cracked concrete, leading into wide open spaces where trains once arrived day and night. The buildings remain standing, solid and orderly, as if waiting for a shift to start that never will. The lockers are the first thing visitors notice. Inside the main building, rows of metal lockers line the walls, their paint chipped but intact. Many still hold what was left behind. Heavy work boots caked with dried mud. Thick coats hanging neatly from hooks. Lunch pails tucked onto shelves, some still bearing faded names scratched into the metal. The air inside carries the faint scent of oil and old fabric. Dust settles slowly, undisturbed by movement. Light filters through high windows, illuminating motes that drift lazily, as if time itself has slowed. Everything feels paused, not abandoned. The air inside carries the faint scent of oil and old fabric. Old Union Yard was once busy beyond measure. Men arrived before sunrise and left long after dark. The work was loud, physical, and constant. Steel clanged. Engines idled. Voices carried over the noise, calling instructions, sharing jokes, filling the space with human presence. The yard functioned because of routine, repetition, and trust. Then, one day, it stopped. No official account explains the sudden closure. Records indicate operations ended quickly, with little notice. Crews were sent home. Equipment was secured. The gates were locked. Yet personal belongings remained, as though everyone expected to return the next morning. They never did. During the day, Old Union Yard feels empty in the expected way. Wind moves through broken windows. Loose signs creak gently. Footsteps echo sharply, too loud in spaces built for crowds. Every sound feels exposed, unprotected by the hum of work that once filled the air. At night, that changes. Visitors who remain after sunset report hearing voices. At first, they assume it is imagination, or sound carrying from elsewhere. But the voices grow clearer, closer. Low conversations. Casual laughter. The sounds do not echo like normal noise. They feel contained, as if coming from specific places just out of sight. Behind boxcars. Around corners. Inside buildings that remain visibly empty. The sounds align perfectly with the layout of the yard, as though invisible crews are moving through familiar routines, following paths worn by decades of repetition. No figures are ever seen. Those who follow the voices find nothing where the sound seems strongest. A doorway opens to an empty room. A corner reveals only shadow. When one area is checked, the voices shift elsewhere. Never retreating, never advancing, simply continuing their work. The locker room is especially unsettling at night. Standing among the rows of personal items, visitors hear conversations that feel closer, more intimate. Remarks exchanged during breaks. Light laughter. The tone is relaxed, unguarded. These are not cries for help or warnings. Some visitors describe a powerful sense of intrusion, as though they are overhearing something not meant for them. Others feel comforted by the normalcy of the sounds, until they remember where they are. Attempts to record the voices have produced mixed results. Audio equipment sometimes captures faint murmurs, too indistinct to identify, layered beneath ambient noise. Other times, recordings are silent despite witnesses clearly hearing conversation during playback. Video footage shows nothing unusual. No movement. No shadows. Just empty structures holding sound that should not exist. Former workers refuse to visit. Those who do speak of the yard describe it as unfinished. They believe the closure interrupted something fundamental, breaking a cycle that had not yet reached its end. Shifts were stopped mid-rhythm. Conversations left unanswered. Tools set down without finality. Lunch pails still contain old wrappers. Notes tucked into coat pockets remain folded, unread. Boots sit paired and ready. Nothing suggests a permanent goodbye. Everything implies return. Locals say the yard remembers how full it was. They believe repetition left an imprint strong enough to persist without people. That the countless days of shared labor shaped the space itself, filling it with echoes that never faded. Working. Talking. Laughing. At night, the effect is strongest near the center of the yard, where crews once gathered most densely. Visitors report hearing multiple conversations at once, blending into a low, constant murmur. The sound rises and falls, matching no wind pattern or external source. Standing still long enough can be disorienting. Some describe losing track of time, convinced only minutes have passed when hours slip by. Others feel an urge to step aside, to avoid blocking paths they cannot see, as if invisible workers might pass through at any moment. No one has been harmed at Old Union Yard. No aggressive behavior has been reported. The voices never address visitors directly. They do not react to being observed. They simply continue, indifferent to the presence of outsiders. This indifference unsettles more than hostility would. The yard does not acknowledge that it is empty. By morning, the sounds fade. Daylight returns the space to silence. Lockers sit quietly. Personal items remain untouched. The illusion of activity disappears completely, leaving behind only the weight of absence. City officials have discussed repurposing the land, but plans stall repeatedly. Surveys are delayed. Crews request reassignment. No clear reason is given, only a shared reluctance to disturb the site. Old Union Yard stands as it always has. Rows of lockers filled with the lives of men who never came back to collect them. Buildings arranged for work that no longer occurs. Tracks leading nowhere. And when night falls, and the city quiets enough to listen, the yard fills again with voices. Men talking nearby. Laughing. Working. As if the shift never ended, and the yard itself refuses to accept that everyone left. The narrow-gauge yard sits compressed between aging factories where brick walls rise high and close, trapping sound and shadow. During the day, machinery hums and forklifts move in steady patterns. At night, everything changes. When factory lights shut down and engines fall silent, the yard becomes a corridor of steel and gravel. Narrow-gauge tracks cut between long rows of rail cars, leaving little space to move. Darkness settles unevenly, broken only by distant streetlights and the glow from security lamps mounted high above. Sound behaves strangely here. A single footstep can echo far longer than expected, bouncing between metal and concrete before fading. Wind slips through gaps between cars, producing low, hollow tones that resemble distant movement. Workers learned long ago to finish their tasks quickly after dark. Then the screams were heard. The first reports came from security guards on overnight patrol. They described sharp cries echoing from between rail cars, sudden and unmistakably human. Guards rushed toward the noise. They searched between cars, along tracks, and around loading areas. They found nothing. No people. No signs of disturbance. The yard returned to stillness, leaving only confusion behind. At first, the incidents were considered isolated. Factories nearby produced loud, unpredictable sounds. Machinery malfunctioned. Pipes vented steam. It was easy to assume the screams were mechanical noise distorted by the narrow space. Then it happened again. And again. The screams followed a pattern. Always after midnight. Always from the deepest part of the yard, where the rail cars stood closest together. Always echoing sharply, then dissolving into silence before anyone could pinpoint their source. Workers grew uneasy. Some refused overnight shifts. Others reported feeling watched while walking between cars, a sensation of presence just beyond sight. Radios crackled with interference in certain sections, briefly cutting out during patrols near the narrowest tracks. Then the gravel was found. Blood-stained patches appeared beneath the cars, darkening the stones in irregular patterns. The stains were fresh, yet no footprints led away. No drag marks. No evidence of struggle beyond the discoloration soaking into the ground. Authorities investigated thoroughly. The yard was searched repeatedly. Cameras were reviewed. Access points were monitored. Cameras were reviewed. Access points were monitored. Access points were monitored. No missing persons were connected to the site. No missing persons were connected to the site. No intruders were identified. No intruders were identified. The stains were documented, cleaned, and dismissed as industrial residue. The stains were documented, cleaned, and dismissed as industrial residue. They returned. They returned. Always in the same areas. Always in the same areas. Always beneath different cars. Always beneath different cars. Sometimes faint. Sometimes faint. Sometimes heavy enough to soak deep into the gravel. Sometimes heavy enough to soak deep into the gravel. Each time, the screams followed within days. Each time, the screams followed within days. No one was ever found. No one was ever found. Those who heard the screams described the same experience. The sound felt close, as if coming from just beyond the nearest car. echoing violently between metal walls, multiplying until direction became impossible to judge. Standing still made it feel closer. Some reported hearing footsteps mixed with the screams, rapid and uneven, stopping abruptly when the sound ended. Others described a sudden pressure in the air, a tightness that made breathing difficult until they left the yard. Factory managers installed additional lighting. The yard grew brighter, shadows pushed back by harsh white beams. For a short time, the screams stopped. The gravel remained clean. Then the lights flickered. One by one, sections of the yard fell back into partial darkness, bulbs burning out without explanation. The yard never returned to full illumination. The screams came back. Louder than before. They echoed through the narrow spaces with enough force to trigger alarms in nearby buildings. Security rushed in teams this time, moving carefully between cars, calling out, listening for any response. They found only blood-stained gravel. The stains appeared warmer than the surrounding stones, as if freshly deposited. Yet there was no source. No injured person. No trace leading out of the yard. Rumors spread quickly. Some said the yard replayed past accidents, moments trapped in the steel corridors where sound never escaped. Others believed the narrow-gauge design amplified more than noise, holding on to fear and releasing it without warning. Old records were examined. The yard had a history of incidents during its early years. Tight clearances. Limited visibility. Workers injured between cars when signals failed or timing was misjudged. Most survived. Some did not return to work. Details were sparse, lost to time and incomplete documentation. The yard never closed. Factories depended on it. Operations continued. But rules changed. No one was allowed to patrol alone. Certain sections were avoided entirely after dark. Those who ignored the rules did not stay long. Several workers quit after hearing the screams up close, describing the sound as overwhelming, personal, as if directed at them specifically. One guard resigned mid-shift, leaving equipment behind and refusing to return. The narrow-gauge yard remains active, but uneasy. During the night, the space tightens. Metal walls seem closer. Sound carries farther. And sometimes, without warning, screams tear through the narrow corridors. Echoing endlessly between rail cars before cutting off mid-breath. No one is ever found. Only blood-stained gravel, soaking silently into the ground, marking a place where something happens. Without leaving behind anything that can be followed. The yard does not reveal its source. It only repeats the result. And those who hear it understand why some spaces are meant to be passed through quickly. Never lingered in, and never explored once the lights go out. Steel Ghost Yard stretches across a forgotten industrial corridor where rail lines once carried endless freight through the night. Rows of steel containers and boxcars sit locked in place, their surfaces dulled by rust and time. By day, the yard feels empty and still, a landscape of metal shapes frozen mid-purpose. By night, it earns its name. The first sightings were reported by maintenance crews passing nearby after sunset. They noticed faint movement between the cars, reflections that did not match the angle of light. At first, it seemed like heat shimmer or tired eyes adjusting to darkness. Then the shapes became clearer. Figures moved through the yard. They appeared human in outline but indistinct, formed of pale, wavering light that bent and shifted as they moved. They did not walk around obstacles. They passed directly through steel walls, doors, and solid machinery as if the metal offered no resistance at all. Witnesses described the movement as purposeful. The figures drifted slowly, arms extending forward, hands open. The gesture was repeated again and again, reaching toward surfaces, through them, beyond them. There was no urgency in the motion, only persistence, as if searching for something just out of reach. No sound accompanied their presence. The yard remained quiet except for distant wind and the faint creak of cooling metal. The figures made no noise, cast no shadows, and left no disturbance behind. When lights were shined directly at them, they faded slightly but did not vanish. Approaching them felt difficult. Those who tried reported an intense sensation of pressure, like moving against a strong current. Each step forward required effort, and many felt compelled to stop before getting close. The air grew colder around the figures, though temperature readings showed no change. They suggested reflections, electrical interference, or atmospheric effects. But the sightings continued, reported by different individuals under different conditions. The descriptions remained consistent, even among those unfamiliar with earlier accounts. The figures always appeared alone. No two were ever seen interacting. They moved independently, following overlapping paths without acknowledgement of one another. Some paused near specific cars, lingering longer before continuing on, arms still extended, hands still searching. At certain points in the yard, the activity increased. Near older boxcars and sealed containers, multiple figures were sometimes seen within minutes of each other. They passed through doors, walls, and couplings, reaching inside spaces that had been closed for decades. When the yard was inspected later, nothing inside had changed. Those who stayed to watch described a growing sense of unease. Not fear exactly, but sadness, layered with confusion. The reaching motion felt incomplete, unresolved. Observers reported the impression that the figures were not wandering aimlessly, but repeating a task they could not finish. Attempts to interact failed. Voices raised toward the figures received no response. Gestures were ignored. When individuals stepped directly into a figure's path, the shape passed through them harmlessly, leaving behind a brief sensation of cold and disorientation. No injuries were reported. Yet those who experienced close contact described lingering effects. A heaviness in the chest. Difficulty focusing. A persistent sense of searching for something they could not name. These sensations faded over time but were rarely forgotten. The yard itself seemed unchanged. Steel Ghost Yard showed no signs of damage, no unusual electromagnetic readings, no structural anomalies. Local stories filled the gaps. They spoke of workers lost to accidents that never made headlines. Of long nights spent loading and unloading under pressure. Of moments when something was misplaced, delayed, or forgotten, creating consequences that rippled outward. These stories varied, but they shared a theme of unfinished tasks. The figures appeared most often just before dawn. During those hours, the yard felt suspended between night and day. Light shifted slowly across metal surfaces, and the shimmering forms became easier to see. As the sun rose higher, the figures faded, dissolving into the glare and reflection. By full daylight, the yard returned to stillness. Nothing moved. Nothing reached. The steel stood silent and inert, offering no hint of what passed through it hours earlier. Steel Ghost Yard remains restricted. Official warnings cite unstable structures and safety concerns. Unofficially, the site is avoided out of respect and unease. As the shimmering shapes move through steel and shadow, their hands remain extended, fingers spread, reaching not toward the living observers, but beyond them. Searching for something left behind in a place built entirely of metal and memory. Steel Ghost Yard stands quiet once more when morning comes. But when night falls, and the air cools against rusted steel, the figures return. Walking through walls. Reaching. Searching. The backhaul yard lies beyond the active rail corridors, set apart from main lines by distance and neglect. Tracks stretch outward and then stop without ceremony, ending in gravel and tall grass. During the day, the yard feels open and exposed, its emptiness emphasized by long sight lines and silent rails that lead nowhere. Nothing moves. Nothing arrives. In its working years, backhaul served a simple purpose. Trains passed through after long hauls, slowing to reorganize cargo before returning the way they came. Engines idled. Headlights cut through dust and fog. The yard existed as a place of transition, not destination. Crews rarely stayed longer than necessary. Once work was complete, the trains reversed direction and disappeared. When rail traffic declined, backhaul was among the first yards to close. Signals were shut off. Power was disconnected. The last train rolled through under clear skies and did not return. Over time, the rails cooled, rust crept in, and the yard slipped into silence. Then the lights began to appear. It always starts the same way. A faint glow appears at the far end of the tracks, low and centered, aligned perfectly with the rails. At first, it looks like a distant vehicle or a reflection. Then it brightens. Two distinct points of light emerge, evenly spaced, unmistakable as train headlights. They begin to move closer. The lights advance steadily, growing larger and brighter with each passing moment. The spacing remains exact. The alignment never wavers. Sound does not accompany the sight. The yard remains silent except for the wind. Yet the visual progression is flawless. Distance collapses at the expected rate. Perspective behaves normally. Everything suggests a train is coming. Observers often step aside instinctively. As the headlights near, the light spills across gravel and rails, casting sharp shadows. The glare becomes intense, filling vision and erasing detail beyond the beams. Then, inches away, the lights vanish. Not dimming. Not fading. Gone instantly, leaving darkness and silence in their place. The space where the train should be is empty. No heat lingers. No dust is stirred. The rails remain cold and untouched. Those standing closest report a moment of disorientation. Depth perception falters briefly, as if the world resets itself. Breathing feels delayed. Heart rate spikes, then settles. The absence feels heavier than the approach ever did. Cameras capture the phenomenon clearly. Footage shows headlights approaching, filling the frame, then cutting out abruptly. There is no glitch, no interruption in recording. The lights simply cease to exist between frames. This does not happen once. The phantom trains appear repeatedly, often several times a night. The approach follows the same route every time, always along the same track, always from the same direction. Sometimes minutes pass between appearances. Sometimes hours. No pattern has been identified. Weather does not influence the phenomenon. Clear nights, fog, rain, and snow all produce the same result. The lights cut cleanly through mist, illuminating it realistically before disappearing. Fog rolls back into darkness as if nothing passed through it. People who remain in the yard long enough begin to anticipate the approach. The distant glow triggers an automatic response. Muscles tense. Attention narrows. Even knowing the lights will vanish does not reduce the sense of urgency as they draw near. The illusion of arrival is too complete to ignore. The lights vanish. A faint rush of air. A soft metallic hum. Always brief, always questionable. Others hear nothing at all. Historical records provide limited context. Backhaul yard handled return trips, trains moving empty or partially loaded back toward origin points. These movements were frequent and repetitive, often performed under low visibility. Headlights approaching, stopping, reversing, and leaving again defined the yard's nightly rhythm. A train that always came close, then turned back. A motion ingrained so deeply it continues without the machine that created it. The headlights appear, fulfill the expectation of arrival, then vanish at the moment when reversal once occurred. Distant light sources, atmospheric conditions, and expectation combining into a convincing illusion. But this theory fails to explain the precision. The exact stopping point. The identical behavior across dozens of documented sightings. Those who try to chase the lights never succeed. Moving toward the approaching glow changes nothing. The lights still stop at the same location relative to the yard, not the observer. Vehicles attempting to intercept find the road ahead empty. There is no angle from which the disappearance can be avoided. The effect is strongest when standing directly on the tracks. Being centered in the path seems to intensify the experience. The headlights feel closer, brighter, more defined. Some report a fleeting sense of pressure just before disappearance, like standing in the path of something that chooses not to arrive. At dawn, the backhaul yard looks ordinary again. Tracks stretch into distance. Weeds bend in the breeze. There are no signs of recent activity. The rails hold no warmth. The silence feels complete, as if the night events never occurred. Yet the memory lingers. Those who witness the phantom trains often describe returning thoughts, flashes of approaching light when closing their eyes. The image of headlights drawing closer without ever reaching their destination becomes difficult to forget. A corridor where arrival is promised but never delivered. Each night, the lights return, traveling faithfully along rails that no longer serve their purpose. A train forever inbound. A journey without arrival. Headlights cutting through the dark, getting closer and closer, until the space they should occupy is suddenly, completely empty. Deep in the heart of the largest abandoned yard lies a single track known as the final line. It begins like any other, rusted steel set into cracked ties, half buried beneath weeds and gravel. At first glance, it appears unremarkable, easily overlooked among the dozens of parallel lines that crisscross the yard. But it is the only one that does not end. The yard itself spans miles of forgotten infrastructure. Empty platforms. Silent signals. Boxcars frozen in place like monuments to motion that never returns. Wind moves freely here, carrying dust and the faint scent of oil long soaked into the ground. During the day, the vastness feels manageable, even mundane. The final line waits closer to the center. Those who approach it often do so by accident. Following curiosity. Following symmetry. The track draws the eye because it remains clear of debris, as though something still passes along it, brushing gravel aside. It points away from the yard's edges and toward a dense pocket of shadow where broken structures cluster tightly together. Light behaves differently there. Even at midday, the far end of the line appears dim, swallowed by overlapping silhouettes of steel frames and collapsed sheds. The darkness does not feel empty. It feels continuous, as if the track leads into something rather than simply away from sight. Standing near the final line produces a subtle sensation. A quiet restlessness. A feeling that remaining still is unnecessary. The idea of turning back feels incomplete, like stopping mid-thought. Most people dismiss this at first. They step onto the rail, testing balance, listening to the hollow echo beneath their boots. Listening to the hollow echo beneath their boots. The steel vibrates faintly, carrying sound farther than expected. Each step forward feels easier than the last. Muscles loosen. Breathing settles into a steady rhythm that matches movement. Walking feels right. Those who continue describe an urge that builds gradually. Not excitement. Not fear. Purpose. A growing certainty that the track is meant to be followed. That stopping would interrupt something already in motion. The yard behind them fades quickly. Sounds from the outer lines fall away. Wind quiets. Even distant traffic seems to vanish. The only noise that remains is the soft scrape of boots on steel and gravel, and the faint hum that travels along the rail, too low to hear clearly, but constant. Some report hearing it as vibration rather than sound. As the track enters the darker section of the yard. Structures close in. Old signal towers loom like sentinels, their lights long dead. Shadows overlap until depth becomes difficult to judge. Distance stretches. Time behaves strangely here. Watches lose minutes, phones drain rapidly, thoughts narrow, focusing only on the next step, then the next. Hunger fades, fatigue feels irrelevant, the body seems willing to continue far beyond its normal limits. Those who try to stop describe a brief moment of resistance, as if the idea must push through something heavy. Search teams have followed the final line many times. They go in pairs, sometimes groups, tethered by ropes, calling out to one another constantly. They mark their progress with paint and flags. Yet the marks fade or vanish entirely by the time they turn back. Some teams report losing members without warning. One moment, a voice is beside them. The next, it is farther ahead, then gone. No sound of struggle. No cry. Just absence, as if the person stepped forward and continued when others chose not to. Locals believe the final line is not a destination, but a direction. A path that embodies movement without arrival. They say the yard once depended on constant motion, trains coming and going without pause. When the yard was abandoned, that motion had nowhere to go. So it condensed into a single track. They say the line offers release from decision. From stopping. From turning back. It takes effort away and replaces it with forward motion. That feels natural and necessary. Those who return from the line describe lingering effects. Restlessness. Difficulty sitting still. Dreams of walking through endless shadow. Guided by steel beneath their feet. Some find themselves pacing without realizing it. Tracing straight lines whenever possible. A few feel drawn back to the yard. Authorities have attempted to block access. Barriers are placed. Signs are posted. Fences are repaired. None last. Gates are found open. Chains loosen. Paths reappear through tall grass as if maintained. The final line is never buried. At dusk, the darkness at its far end deepens. The shadow thickens until it appears almost solid, absorbing what little light remains. Standing at the edge of the track during this time produces a powerful pull, like standing at the top of a long descent. Those who resist describe it as exhausting. Walking away from the line feels harder than walking toward it. Each step back requires focus, will, intention. Looking over the shoulder makes the effort worse, as if the line notices hesitation. Few choose to look. The largest abandoned yard remains officially closed, but it is not empty. Wind moves through steel. Signals creak. Gravel shifts under unseen pressure. And deep within it, the final line continues to wait. A track leading into darkness. It does not threaten. It simply offers one thing. The chance to keep going. For some, that offer is impossible to refuse. They step onto the rail. They follow it forward. And somewhere beyond the reach of light and memory, they continue walking, long after the yard has fallen silent, leaving behind only a straight line of steel and the knowledge that not every path is meant to end. You have now walked through 20 haunted industrial rail yards in Illinois. Places built on labor, danger, and sacrifice. Where steel remembers every scream. And the tracks remember every step taken for the last time. These rail yards may look quiet now. Forgotten. Still. These rail yards may look quiet now. But beneath the rust and weeds, something remains awake. Waiting for footsteps. Waiting for sound. If you ever find yourself near abandoned tracks at night, listen carefully. Do not follow lights you do not recognize. And never step onto rails you cannot see the end of. Thank you for spending this unsettling time with me. Slow your breathing. Let the echoes fade. And if you hear metal clanking somewhere in the distance tonight, remember. Some trains never stopped running. Until our next journey into the darkness, stay safe.